Hello, history lovers. There's no denying that the times we're going through right now in the world are scary. We're going through some pretty dark times, and it can be really hard to see the light. But you know what? That's what this time of year is all about. Even when things are at their worst, there is still light in the world. And that's what was found during the Christmas truce of 1914 during World War One. Now, World War One is a very, very complicated historical time as far as the things that led up to it, the policies. Of course, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, but that was just the match that lit the bomb. I won't go into all of that in this video because that's like a 2-hour video just on its own. So I'm going to focus in this video on the truce. There's something about this time of year that makes people long to find joy. And when there isn't any, the best of us will try to create some. And that's what happened in the trenches during World War One. Some of the soldiers began to decorate their trenches, trying to find any little sign of Christmas that they could.
The first signs of the Christmas truce on the Western Front appeared on Christmas Eve of 1914. In many areas along the front, German soldiers had begun decorating their trenches with candles and small Christmas trees.
Ironically, most of the soldiers believed that the war would be over by Christmas. Of course, that wasn't going to happen. Now, both sides were trying to find some kind of Christmas, but what brought them together? Well, there's different stories depending on where on the Western Front you happen to be. But for most of them, and in most parts of the front line, it was music. Music has been called the universal language, and that's very true. Whether you were English or German, they knew those Christmas carols and they enjoyed singing them. Now, to set the stage a little bit, of course both sides were using trench warfare. Each side had their trench, and in between was what was called no man's land, where you were exposed, you didn't want to stand up there, you didn't want to go there. But each trench was close enough where the two sides could hear each other singing. And that, for most of the soldiers, was the start of something.
Their own trenches. Then the singing began. From the German trenches came the sound of Stille Nacht, or Silent Night. The British troops, recognizing the melody, joined in with English lyrics. Soon other carols followed. The sound of these familiar songs, sung in different languages, but with the same spirit, drifted across no man's land.
The soldiers really enjoyed each other singing, and they would call to the other side asking for an encore, they would applaud. It was a bright spot in this living nightmare that war always is. Now, while this was going on, the Pope actually called to have a time of peace over. This moment is recounted in a performance called All Is Calm. I first saw this performance on PBS. If you happen to subscribe to the PBS streaming station, I'm sure they'll have it loaded soon for the holiday season. Otherwise, watch for it on the PBS channels. It's a very moving performance that includes letters being read that the soldiers wrote home during those times, as well as songs that they would have sung. So I really recommend that, and if you don't happen to have access to PBS, I am including a link that I found to the same performance but by other performers. So I highly recommend that if you want to learn more about the Christmas truce, you watch that, because what better way to learn about it than in the words of those who lived it? But as I said, the Pope actually called for a Christmas truce at this time.
In the name of the divinity, I beseech thee to cease the playing of arms, while Christendom celebrates the feast of the world's redemption. Pope Benedict the 15th, December 7, 1914.
The German leaders accepted the Holy Father's appeal for a ceasefire at once, but the leaders of the Allied forces did not. The Pope's request for a Christmas truce was arrogantly rejected.
Your average soldier was very much in favor of a truce. Who wants to fight at Christmas? And yet, they didn't really get a say. At least, they wouldn't have had a say if those higher up had had their way about it. In fact, there were strict orders prohibiting a truce.
Friendly intercourse with the enemy, unofficial armistices, and the exchange of tobacco and other comforts, however tempting and amusing they may be, are absolutely prohibited. G.T. Forster Walker, Brigadier General, December 1940.
Now, why would your higher ups be against a truce? Well, it's a lot harder to kill someone after you've sung songs with them, exchanged gifts, maybe even played a game with them, gotten to know them as a human being. How are you going to go out there the next day and shoot that person? Well, in spite of those orders from the higher ups who needed to keep the war going, a truce did come about. And one soldier reports it starting with one of the Germans stepping into no man's land, which was an incredibly daring move. Because in no man's land, you were exposed. You were a clear target. You did not step into no man's land unless you wanted to be shot at. And yet, this soldier was wanting peace at least for Christmas so bad that he took that chance.
Parapet, we could see he'd left his trench and was standing on the top bank in the open and in full view. He then walked towards us and stood in the middle of no man's land. He either had full confidence of the Christian spirit of Christmas Day, or he was completely round the twist. But whatever it was, we admired his guts.
Sometimes that's all it takes is one person being either brave or maybe crazy enough to say, I'm taking a chance on peace. I'm taking a chance on the goodness in people. And that one person can get others to follow.
Then one German took a chance and jumped up on top of the trench and shouted out, "Happy Christmas, Tommy!" So of course our boys said, well, if he can do it, we can do it. And we jumped up. A sergeant major shouted, "Get down!" But we said, shut up, sergeant, it's Christmas time.
Now, there is no way to deny that there are times in history when wars had to be fought in order to stop a greater evil from taking hold. Of course, the obvious example is World War II. Had the Allies not taken a stand and said, hey, we're not letting Hitler do this, I don't even want to think about the dark road that would have ended up taking us down, taking the whole world down. And there are wars today where countries are being invaded by somebody hungry for land and power who's clearly in the wrong, and that has to be stopped. But there's always people who don't agree with their leaders, who just want to live their lives, who didn't ask to be dragged into this war. That's the case today, and that was the case back in World War I. And it's something to think about because the German people and the English people share a strong connection. The English people have been referred to as Anglo-Saxons. Well, that's because a lot of settlers to England during the medieval times came from the Saxon area of what is today Germany. So those people are connected. Even the British monarchy has German roots because at one time there was no heir to the British throne, no surviving child that there could be that could inherit the title of king or queen. So they had to go looking to Germany to find a distant relative who could be heir to the throne, and that was George I, who was the originator of the British Hanover dynasty. Now, it was only after World War I started that the British royal family changed their surname to Windsor because they had to get it to sound more English. Before that, they'd had a German surname. So you can see there how these peoples were tied. And that's mentioned by one of the British soldiers who took part in this truce. And they didn't want to fight in this war that they had. They didn't care for their leader at all. They didn't want what was going on. So you can see how the war affected the everyday person. And it is tragic to think about.
Fellows, they look more like university students than soldiers. And one of them said, "We don't want to kill you, and you don't want to kill us, so why shoot? You are Anglo-Saxons, we are Saxons. We don't want to fight you."
What about the Kaiser then, old lad? What do you think of the Kaiser, eh?
Oh, you bring him here to us and we'll shoot him for you.
The connections between the Germans and the British are demonstrated further because there were Germans who had worked in England. They knew London very well. These peoples were connected and they're being to fight. And it's amazing the connections that they could find between each other once they got talking. And it makes you wonder if both sides, if the average person could sit down and talk, what kind of connections could they find that might end stupid wars that don't really have to be fought? Like I said before, I don't deny that there are wars that had to be. But it's amazing to think how the average person could find those connections that could lead to peace.
One German said to me,
Do you know there's the Essex Road in London is?
"Yes, my uncle had a shoe repairing shop there."
That's funny. There's a barber shop on the other side where I used to work.
They could all speak very good English because before the war, Britain was invaded by Germans. Every pork butcher was German, every barber shop was German, and they were all over here getting the lowdown on the country. It's ironic if you think about it, that he must have shaved my uncle at times, and yet my bullet might have found him, and his bullet might have found me.
With those connections found, it wasn't long before they started to exchange gifts, like cigarettes. They showed each other family photos. There were even examples of addresses being exchanged so that when peace came again, they could exchange letters or, who knows, maybe even meet up again in person. And they gave each other the dignity of burying their dead together in no man's land. Which, can you imagine? There they were, burying friends of theirs who'd been killed by somebody that they are standing there talking with now, knowing that these people took shots at their friends, took shots at them. And yet somehow the peace continued. And not only did they exchange gifts, did they talk about family together, they even had a game of soccer, what they would have called football. And that lasted until their superior officers put a stop to it.
Yesterday's enemies. But after an hour's play, when our commanding officer heard about it, he sent an order that he must put a stop to it. Halt! A little later, we drifted back to our trenches, once the fraternization ended. The game finished with a score of 3-2 in favor of Fritz versus Tommy.
Unfortunately, the orders came that were really reinforced. And that made sure that the Christmas truce of 1914 could never be repeated. And some of the soldiers said later that they wondered what would have happened had they defied those orders. Had they all just said, okay, no, we've become friends now, we've gotten to know each other, I'm not going to take another shot. But they never felt like they had that choice. But it's amazing to wonder what would have happened if they would have.
General handshaking, arms were resumed, and everyone crawled back to his trench.
The Commander-in-Chief views with grave displeasure the recent reports of improper intercourse with the enemy, and directs the officers involved to be so informed. It appears that troops, under the improper use of a flag of truce, has entered into communication with the enemy. Let it be clearly understood that under no form should any officer or man take such action.
The Christmas truce of 1914 could never be repeated. But it still stands as an example of one moment in history when people said, we don't want to see the worst in each other. We want to be good people. We don't want to kill. We don't want to fight. Let's find common ground. Let's not listen to those who would make us fight. It only lasted one night. But imagine what a start one night can be. And imagine if a little Christmas spirit could do that, could put a stop to a war, even if it was only for one night. Maybe we can still expect some Christmas miracles even in our times. I wish you all a wonderful holiday, no matter what winter holiday you're celebrating. And until next time, take care.